Hello and welcome, everybody. We're so excited to be here today. My name is Michelle Taylor. I'm the head of global sports sponsorships for Tata Consultancy Services. And joining me is Haley Price, head of sports sponsorships for North America, and Frank Tiana, futurist and managing partner. We're excited to talk through the future of this run. We'll go through a little bit about our This Run campaign. We'll talk about our research around running and technology, and then look into the future of sport. Before we get started, we want to talk to you a little bit about Tata Consultancy Services. Tata Consultancy Services, also known as TCS, is a global leading IT solutions provider. We service companies and have clients across all industries: retail, banking, finance, insurance, healthcare, manufacturing, and travel. We really pride ourselves in valuing innovation, partnership, and giving back to our communities. We give back to the communities in a few different ways: sustainability, health and fitness, and STEM education. We've got 453,000 employees across the world. About our sports sponsorships. So TCS's sports sponsorships, you can see, really have a heavy focus around running and endurance sports. We have a really special relationship with running and are arguably the leading business-to-business sponsor of running events in the last 10 years. These running sponsorships span 12 cities, 4 continents. We leverage our sponsorships to really target a few different objectives. Through our sponsorships, we really try to cover off on 2 main areas. On the next slide, you'll see our sponsorship pillars. So basically, we use our sponsorship to enable company progress and reinforce our culture and values. We do this in a few different ways. Obviously, using the sponsorships to create brand awareness for TCS. We really engage our clients and employees in these events, encouraging them to run and be healthy and fit with us. We showcase technology, and we show people the power of how technology can be used to solve problems and add value to the experiences. And then lastly, giving back to the communities where we live and operate. Across our sponsorships this year, we've been using a special campaign called This Run. This run is really a great campaign that allows us to show up consistently across all our sponsored races from branding and activation perspective. What it also does is it allows us to create this year-round campaign, leveraging the sports and running events that we sponsor as tentpoles, but allowing us to engage with our employees, clients, and prospects year-round. We're going to look at a few different active ways that we've been activating the This Run campaign. Again, we've been activating it around our sports sponsorships. In particular this year, what we've seen is technology is playing a key role in keeping runners connected. Through our racing apps, we're able to help many of our running partners turn their live events virtual and help with some of the virtual running events that we've seen. We've been able to add some cool features, allow people to get their medals digitally, and really engage the running community. Outside of the running events, we've been able to take on different projects such as the TCS Sustainability Challenge. But for sure, across the board, what we've seen this year is technology is the key to keeping our runners connected. And to speak on this further and share some of the insights and information we've gathered through our running and technology survey, I'm going to pass the baton over to Haley Price. Over to you, Haley.
Thanks, Michelle. As you just heard, technology is at the forefront of our sponsorship activations for both runners and fans. This year, TCS's dedication to technology and sport came to life through This Run Tech Survey. The goal was to conduct a survey to not only gauge current tech usage among runners during the pandemic, but also gauge the threshold for adoption in the future. For instance, how likely are runners to use virtual reality training partners, drones for hydration, advanced wearables, and even implantables? We surveyed over 1,200 runners in the US, and here's what we discovered. Taking our survey results, TCS is looking toward the future of sports 10, 20, 50 years from now. The results also help us gain insights on how to better invest in our activations and serve the needs of runners. Surveys like this one help to give us indicators, some short-term, some long-term, for the future of sports. And here to show us a glimpse into that future is TCS futurist Frank Diana. Over to you, Frank.
Well, thanks so much, Haley. Great to be here. And as you mentioned, as a futurist, I spend most of my time looking out on the horizon and trying to understand exactly what might occur in the next decade or two. And what we'll do is focus on the future of sports and what it might mean for mass participation sports in general. And as you saw from that survey, technology plays a very big role. So take this journey with me as we look at the various pieces of the sports industry, as you can see here, from sports to the fans themselves to the venue, and actually how other domains like mobility, for example, may impact this future. So let's take a ride, starting with the actual venue itself. And if we think about the venue and specifically the complexes, here's one great intersection point where mobility and autonomous vehicles specifically impact the need for parking. And as parking is impacted, the venue itself or the complex may require a smaller footprint. And as it does, the complex gets better integrated into city life. Or it might become a multi-purpose venue where we can actually use amusement park rides or see concerts or movies or restaurants all within the complex. And so it becomes a family event, not just the event itself. But as long as we're there for sporting activities, we might actually see the event on mega displays throughout the complex. And then another great intersection point is how society itself is influencing the path of sports. For example, global inequality continues to rise. And as it does, a continued decline in attendance in the complex may occur. And if that happens, we're likely to see micro stadiums where they're actually scaled down and cater to the super rich. So these stadiums are really attended by the rich, which leaves the middle 40% to experience sports in third venues, if not their homes. And these third venues are like family-oriented sports bars where technologies like holographic replays or 3D displays, as you walk into the venue, you feel like you're walking onto the field itself. So this is where the middle is likely to experience sports in the future. And mixed reality, some combination of mixed reality is virtual and augmented reality, and those things used to experience the events on a much larger scale. And as we think about that, we start thinking about safety and security. And these things get more important as more of sports are experienced in cyberspace. And so one of the key things that we were learning from the survey is the signals, or are the signals that might influence where this future goes. So for example, we're looking at running technology as a motivator for racing, and using, for example, cameras to understand whether the pandemic is influencing us from a fever perspective, and checking that before we even get to the starting line, or collecting data on safety and security so that we remain safe in these events. And even interestingly, spilling over into climate change, another great intersection where the influence of carbon neutral footprints at these events increase our participation in the events themselves. So really a great understanding of how results like this from a survey help us think about where this future might go. Beyond the complex is the fan. And the fan is really changing and has been for the last several years. Their role is much more active. They're an active participant in creating the experience, not just being part of the experience. They control more of that experience. They're driving conversations. They're taking videos at events that are making their way across social media channels. And so the boundaries are blurring between the fan and media itself, where the fan is a media entity unto themselves. And beyond that is a set of expectations that really mimics what we're seeing in every industry, where our expectations are rising. Personalization is something we experience everywhere, and sports is also happening there. And generations like the boomers, millennials, and Generation Z think differently. We have seen a 10% increase in participation for sports across those generations, but they do think differently. So millennials are famous for cutting the cable cord, and Gen Z is becoming famous for liking the athlete much more than the team. And how do you think about these differences in generations when you think about sports? But some things are common. They all want increased access to players, not just teams. They want more content. And again, they're participating in creating that content. And they want to connect on their terms. Much of our viewing experience is going behind a paywall, but especially millennials and Generation Z want to connect on their terms. And they want immersive experiences. They want to be part of the experience. And as we think about experience, again, technology plays a major role. Mixed reality, as I mentioned before, is a piece of it, but holographic replays where you can actually walk around the replay, or having a best seat in the stadium for all of us, or actually viewing the sport through the lens of the athlete. Envision viewing a football game through the quarterback's face mask. But all this means we want to be part of a community, and we want to be part of the conversation. And so that brings us to content. The term content is king has never been more relevant as we think about each of us being not just a consumer of that content, but a producer of it. And these generations, millennials and Generation Z, are truly Generation Remix, where they're mashing up all kinds of content, whether it's their content or media-related content, in ways that create dialogue, in ways that create experiences. So content becomes very important, and it changes the model. It's a mixed ownership model going forward, supported by blockchain. And even content itself that's pirated is much more embraced by the millennials and Generation Z, because again, paying behind a firewall is not something they've experienced in the past. Beyond that is engagement. And obviously all of this is about engagement. And so it's going to get very interesting as far as how we engage in sports. If you're a statistics lover, you're going to see stats about an athlete augmented on the field of play. You're going to participate in decision making. So envision the crowd helping owners determine who to acquire, who to draft, or the crowd actually calling the play on the field in real time before the coach can even make a decision. All of those things are here and coming rapidly in terms of engagement. And then, of course, there's the athlete. And again, mass participation sports, we're all athletes in that regard. And so this also impacts all of us. And one is how we engage. The athlete in the past was really behind the media, and the media was a gatekeeper. Today, the athlete goes direct. There's examples of how athletes are playing esports these days because of the pandemic. And in so doing, they're connecting directly with an athlete as an example. The edge in sports, and this is really relevant for mass participation sports, shifts to the softer things like character and strategy and teamwork, and our mental edge, because as these technologies continue to evolve, the physical attributes reach a level of parity. In fact, genetic screening could be used to create those edges as we look to use genetics to filter out who can be successful at a sport and who might not be. And beyond that is the maximization of performance. Look at all the various different ways that we might leverage technology to maximize our performance, from wearables, which you saw in Haley describing some of the survey results, but also AI coaching or predicting injuries before they happen. And all of this, at the heart of it, is data. And as we look at data in the shorter term, our survey results focused on what we use that data for. So interestingly, distance and time and heart rate, calorie burn, pace, those are all things that we want to use technology and data to understand and better track. And for what reasons? Again, another point of intersection where we look at sports intersecting with wellness, staying healthy, staying active at the top of the list of why we use this data and these technologies. So interesting to see not just the shorter term view of technology and data, but how it intersects with some of these broader future domains. And as you look at the bottom list of technologies here, again, you saw some of that in the video, and the top in terms of who definitely will use these technologies. You can see some of the mix of what people will embrace and are not likely to embrace in the future. And interestingly, the further out in time you go, the less interest there seems to be, but I expect that to change as these technologies start to take off. So from there, we go from that shorter term view of performance to a complete blurring of the boundaries between machines and athletes. As you look at the convergence of machines with humans, and this is a broad phenomena, as we converge with machines to affect our health, whether it's bionic limbs or it's a chip in our brain to solve the Parkinson's issue, these things are here and will be the reasons why we start to merge with machines. But as you do that, you clearly affect the performance of the athlete. Artificial body parts, implants, all of these things, including exoskeletons, start to blur the boundaries between the human or the athlete and the machine. And as we go out even further into the future, we start thinking about actually engineering the future athlete. So genetically, we're able to do that today. And so do we create these virtual athletes, these super athletes, even robotics in the context of sports? Do robots play the sport for us? And it's not just science fiction. We already know what the gene variations are that cause super athleticism. And so using techniques like CRISPR, we're obviously able to, at some point, modify these things and create those super athletes. And so again, think in terms of any kind of sport, mass participation or other, and what it might mean if we're able to do these kinds of things. And then, of course, there's the sports themselves. And they're all going to change, if not already changing. And I mentioned before robots playing or enhanced athletes playing in these leagues. Do we evolve towards a place where we have these enhanced leagues versus natural leagues? And maybe they do play off. Wouldn't it be nice to see a Super Bowl where we had enhanced athletes playing against natural athletes and seeing how that plays out? Beyond that is esports. This is an interesting phenomena in that a good example of where the pandemic is accelerating the path of a scenario, in this case, esports. Because people have been home much more frequently, there has been an uptick in the use of esports. And I mentioned earlier that athletes themselves are participating in those sports. And it really starts to bring interesting discussions around marketing and advertising and how to reach various players through an esport. But the participation in sports itself, as more and more people embrace sports through these electronic means, is likely to increase and soar. And that has a ripple effect into health and wellness, as you might imagine. We're seeing talent ecosystems emerge where people are actually scouting for these kinds of esports athletes. Celebrity gamers are becoming very popular, and the prize pools and the attendance at these esports are topping actual professional sports. And as I mentioned, COVID being an influencer on esports, it is also shown to be an influencer on how participation in running. So clearly, as you can see from this visual, especially for avid runners, the pandemic has been a motivator and a driver of participation in running. And as you connect that to another big phenomenon around mental health and the issues we're seeing around the world around mental health, you can start to see why running might be a good tonic, if you will, for that problem. And beyond that is fantasy sports, just a growing phenomena. There are double the viewers, fantasy sports viewers, double their viewership of sports than regular viewers. And so leagues know that. And they're trying to connect to these fantasy sports venues or approaches much more effectively. So you're seeing a connection there as well. And extreme sports has been a phenomena and a growing one. And interestingly, Brands are showing much more interest in these extreme sports, but they're getting more extreme. How about outer space diving, or using robotic exoskeletons to test an extreme sport without getting too injured, or using robots as guinea pigs to test the sport before participating in it. All of these things are here at some level and coming actually much more aggressively. And as mentioned earlier, each of these sports will be driven by the crowd. Our participation in sports, whether it is by physically participating or participating at some level, whether it's decision making or play calling, etc., the sport itself will become much more of a crowd-oriented phenomena. And then the audience itself. Global audiences are going to be big. The soccer phenomena is likely to take hold across every sport. And women become a bigger target for all leagues and all kinds of sports in terms of their involvement in sports, their audience, their participation, etc. The human is also very interesting, and again, another segue into a bigger discussion, not just sports. All of these things start to talk to what it might mean for us as humans. So accelerated healing is a great example of life sciences helping us actually heal, whether it's fracture putty that allows you to heal from a fracture in 2 days, or the use of stem cells or bioinformatics to really aggressively heal is one piece of the story. The other is how participation in sports starts to optimize our well-being. And that's not just traditional participation in sports, but what if the body itself becomes a controller for a game as opposed to the joystick, which we're already seeing? And actual physical talent becomes a differentiator in participation in that sport and success in that sport. And here again, you'll start to see colleges embrace these things, scouting and scholarships for people that can do those things very effectively. And so a really good connection between an evolution of a sport platform and how it might optimize our well-being. Beyond that, is the extension of our healthy lives. So this is a great connection to what we're seeing in the life sciences around healthy life extension, living much longer in productive ways. Already here, some people have said that the first person to live to 200 has already been born. Radical life extension speaks to the elimination of death completely. And as silly as that might sound, there are 50 companies at least that are focused on that problem. And so regenerative medicines, precision medicines, all approaches to actually extending our lives. And as we do so, we potentially can extend the careers of athletes. And so as you see from the visual, all these dots and lines, there's an intent behind that. There are dots connecting all over the place that really help us understand and shape the future that's emerging. And lastly is the stakeholders in sports. Lots of them, starting with media, which has been quite affected by the transition in terms of the fan being a predominant player in the whole media game. But there's so much more going on. Content delivery is changing, as we've seen with streaming and other approaches. The content providers themselves, as I said, fans are actually providers of content and others. This notion of pay-per-view versus free content, that's going to play out aggressively over the next couple of years. And what if the internet companies decide to, change the game by acquiring leagues and or media rights and box out major networks? So media is a big one. The teams themselves, everything I've discussed starts to impact and influence the teams themselves. Their roles are changing. As I mentioned, they integrate with fantasy much more aggressively. And things like tapping into the broader social graph, so their reach is enhanced. All of these things change the teams and leagues themselves, and attendance issues will be something to keep an eye on. And officials are not safe. We've already seen automated balls and strikes being called in baseball. This has been talked about a lot, but we will see a lot of automation actually disrupt and change the nature of officiating across all sports. And Olympics will also change. There's been talk about esports being included in the Olympics as far as extreme sports, already seeing some of that, but we're likely to see new sports categories evolve in the context of Olympics as well. And all of this ripples into the impact on brands, where brands are affected because their reach is affected. And so do they look to own sports? Do brands look to actually sponsor and create championships or leagues themselves? Just a series of interesting questions. And we can see from this final slide that the change in media is apparent in where we go for our news and information and content, from the traditional side on the left to obviously a much more, a bigger embrace of the social media channels on the right. So all of that speaks to a definitive change in stakeholders and their involvement. So with that, I thank you, and I want to turn it back over to Michelle.
Join us for this run. You can check out more about the survey and survey results at tcs.com or catch up with us at the Speakers Lounge. Thank you very much.